Okay, we good to go? Mic's on? All right, so let's just introduce, let's hear who you guys are, starting with Mayor Nadolsky. Would love just a brief introduction, who you are, what you're up to. Maybe some of you are familiar.
I kind of feel like you just introduced me.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. I'm Ben Nadolsky, Ogden City Mayor, formerly biologist for the Division of Wildlife Resources in what feels like a life long ago. It's really nice seeing a lot of friendly faces here today. I spent my prior career of 23 years before becoming mayor after a series of poor life choices. Working in natural resources, starting out as a fish biologist, working with Paul Burnett and at DWR and Trout Unlimited, working on stream ecology and stream restoration and studying hydrology and fluvial geomorphology alongside Paul. Working with Eric McCauley and river restoration on the Ogden River Restoration Project, and all the way through to working on policy issues with the governor's office on western-wide public lands policy issues of tremendous conflict and controversy. And finished my career of 23 years with the Division of Wildlife, supervising operations in northern Utah, which include the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program. And I saw Kyle here somewhere, my man. It's great seeing everybody. Thanks for being here. This is an important topic, not just for our community, but just for me personally. It's a topic of passion. The Great Salt Lake is something that I greatly miss working on in my prior life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chandler. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jill Koford. I am a first-term representative in the Utah House. I serve in District 10, which covers parts of Ogden, South Ogden, Riverdale, Washington Terrace, and a little bit of unincorporated Weber County, kind of the southeast part of Ogden. I just finished my first session. I am working in the Great Salt Lake space, which is overwhelming, exciting, and super awesome, and terrifying all at the same time. I got involved with the Great Salt Lake in 2022, just a little bit as an observer, trying to figure out what was going on. If you'll remember back in 21-22, our then Speaker of the House was Brad Wilson. Brad is a good friend, and he started bringing awareness to the challenge that we're facing with the lake. More importantly, I grew up in Ogden, and I remember driving to Salt Lake, and I remember when the water came to the railroad tracks. And now where Farmington Station is, that was all underwater. And so watching that lake recede and watching what's happened and just being aware of how hard, personally, my district, my home gets hit by some of the consequences of a drying lake. It was an easy ask when Speaker said, we'd really like to see you jump into this space. I was please put me in. And so I'm a little bit of a rookie, but learning a lot and really grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, we're grateful to have you. I don't know if you guys heard in the legislature, they say friends don't let friends run water bills, and Representative Koford here has just dove in head first, so we appreciate that.
Got a couple water bills.
Darren Hess with Weber Basin Water Conservancy District. I've been in this space for about 27, 28 years, and it's been awesome to work in the water industry. I see a lot of friends out there. Thanks for coming and being here tonight. So I'm a civil engineer by trade. Started in my career in engineering, and then just kind of moved over eventually to strategic initiatives, future planning, and then moved over to operations. So I'm currently over operations for Weber Basin Water. And so, what Weber Basin does is we're a large water purveyor in northern Utah, and so we supply drinking water to about 50 cities in the area. We also provide wholesale raw and secondary water to a lot of irrigation districts as well. And then we have our own secondary water system, about 23,000 retail connections that we deliver water to individual homes. So we kind of cover the full gamut there as far as water supply. We also deliver water to different industries, Compass Minerals, West Tech, others out west, and all the refineries down south in North Salt Lake. We deliver water to those as well. So lots of water issues, right? It seems like things get more complicated, not less, as we continue to move forward. And the Great Salt Lake is one that is definitely a complicated issue, very complex, as Chandler said. And so look forward to getting into some of the topics tonight.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. My name is Jake Serago. I'm an engineer at the Utah Division of Water Resources, which is housed in the Department of Natural Resources. Our mandate is to plan, conserve, develop, and protect the state water resources. So we do a few main things there. We have a project section which provides grants and loans to irrigation companies, to municipalities, or to counties, or anyone who's trying to fund projects for water supply or water improvement or water efficiency projects. We also have a conservation branch which works on implementing water savings, water efficiency programs with municipalities and counties, and to support local land use planning. And then we have a planning section which looks at trying to quantify this water supplies from snowpack, precipitation, and groundwater across the state, and also look at how those supplies could change in the future. We also work on assessing how water is used throughout the state and synthesizing that data and providing analysis to the executive branch, the governor's office, or to legislators, or to local water suppliers. And I guess my connection is that I really love drinking clean water and breathing really clean air.
I think that's just you, though. So yeah, that's a personal deal. Thank you, guys. We clearly have an all-star cast. Really grateful that you guys are all here. Darren, why don't you start us off with just helping us understand the context, what you're seeing in Weber County as relates to water issues, especially maybe kind of the intersection of growth, Great Salt Lake needs. Yeah, what does it look like from the district perspective?
Yeah, so from our perspective, there's a lot of growth planned out in western Weber County. We knew that, this was always coming. We're kind of waiting here for when this would really explode. And it looks like, it's happening based on what we're seeing out in western Weber County. I understand they've got like 14,000 lots approved out there off of 12th Street. With more coming, I understand there's upwards of 30,000 units that are going to be built out there in the next 30 to 40 years, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of time to get the infrastructure built. So it's going to be a process. But as we look at that, we say, okay, how are we going to really meet the demands out there in the future for 30,000 new units, right? And I know growth, a lot of times, folks aren't real excited about new growth, especially once they've made it here, they want to close the door behind them and say, okay, nobody else gets to move here. We really can't do that, right? We have to work and move forward and ensure that we can have an economic vitality to the state of Utah and continue our economic push. And so when we look at water resources, we're saying we have a really finite water supply. I don't think, sometimes people don't really realize how critical our water supply is and how finite it really is. I see, I get really agitated when I go by and see my neighbors watering every day. Now, I'm not that guy that goes up and tells my neighbor, you got to shut it off, right? Because I got to create.
Not yet, you're not.
Well, these are neighbors on my street. If it's somebody I don't know, then yes, I will do that. Yeah. But it's very aggravating for me because I'm in this space. I know how fragile our water supply is. And then when folks just let it rip and don't care about the water that they're using, I just don't think they realize how important this resource is. So as we look to western Weber County, we really need to ensure that we're using low water use landscapes, right? It's critical that we have low water use landscapes. I'm sure we'll probably get into it more, but outdoor irrigation is really what is hurting the Great Salt Lake. what is really negatively impacting the Great Salt Lake, because 80-90% of that water is depleted, it's lost to the system, it's very shallow irrigation, and it doesn't reach our underground aquifers that are 600, 800, 1,000 feet deep. It just doesn't. It evapotranspirates off, and that water is gone, moves over to Denver, to the next customer. And so we have to be very careful about, especially our outdoor irrigation and how we grow moving forward. And we're really promoting low water use landscapes, especially in that Western Weber County area. As we met with the commission for the county, and then a lot of the water districts out there, we've talked about how we're going to try to dissect this and move things forward. It's a complicated issue. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. We're working on a treatment plant right now out in Western Weber County. The initial price tag on it was $600 million to build this large water campus to deliver water out to Western Weber County. We don't have $600 million, okay? So we're going back now, we're doing some value engineering on this project. But that infrastructure is going to cost a lot of money, and so a lot of decisions moving forward here.
I don't envy your position, but I'm grateful for your work. Yeah, thank you. Mayor Nadolsky, I would love to hear how you're thinking about this or seeing this from the Ogden City perspective, this, growth. Suddenly now everyone wants cities to send water to Great Salt Lake. How are you thinking about all of that?
So when you think about the Great Salt Lake and the Basin, this is something I learned in my career, is you cannot think about one stretch of river without thinking about this stretch of river above it and below it. When you talk about connecting our systems back to each other, that's a lot of the work that we did. And there was a time in my own life and in my own mindset where I didn't connect Ogden and the Great Salt Lake. And I remember we held our first conference for the Weber Partnership. Remember this, Burnett? When John Luft was like, you talked a lot about the Weber and all the tributaries. What about the Great Salt Lake? Right? And so there are paradigms that we're pushing and constantly challenging. And that was a long, long time ago. It was before a lot of all of the water scarcity talk that we're in now. But as the big city of northern Utah, whether we want to admit it or not, we are the downtown of northern Utah. We are the big city and the leader of northern Utah. And so I find a tremendous amount of responsibility for our city to be a leader in a lot of things. We're a reasonably well-resourced city, but we have our limits on our resources. We're not a wealthy city. 40% of our city is tax exempt. We have a population of people that are hardworking, middle-class Americans, many of which are struggling to get by every single day. And so I can't do everything by myself on behalf of all cities for northern Utah, but we can set an example. And given my background, I know there are places where we can, and we already have. And so that's the way I'm thinking about it, is how do we lead out to set examples that others can follow? And we are seeing other cities and other counties even following our example.
Amazing, thank you. I love what you said about constantly pushing the paradigm, because I think that's often goes underappreciated, is like how new it is, this thinking, these people working together now considering Great Salt Lake as a water user. Like, this hasn't been done, and so if the progress feels slow, it's often not because there's not concern or effort, it's because this is new and we're like, how do we do this? How should we do this, So really appreciate you highlighting that. Representative Koford, would love to turn to you and just hear about your perspectives at the legislature, what you're thinking about and working on as relates to Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, thank you, Chandler. So I think, first of all, like I said, it's great to see so many people here, which is, I think, important to note, again, because there is I think we're having a movement right now where there's a lot of excitement and awareness about what's happening with the lake. With the new Great Salt Lake Rising happening, with the governor's refocus and recommitment on this, it gives me a lot of hope, because I felt like we had gotten a little bit lax in what we were doing. Not from a legislative perspective, but maybe as a whole, as a community, that there's a little bit of fatigue around some of the conversations, and there's some good things happening. We have really good, a really good framework already set up. Last year's bill was a cleanup bill. This year we had really big legislation in October for berm management. The berm is probably one of the most important tools we have to help with salinity and lake levels. And giving the Division of Forestry, Fires, and State Lands a little more flexibility in how they manage the berm, which is what we did in this last legislative special session, gives them the tools that they need to make sure that we can protect that very fragile ecosystem. And it allows them to collect, well, they're collecting more data, not just hyper-focusing on the salinity, but they can focus on a couple of other metrics as well, and they can adjust that berm when they need to. Looking forward to next session, I did mention I have some bills. I think that we will see, well, I know you'll see a couple of Great Salt Lake specific bills. We're working through that language right now. We have a lot of our key stakeholders that we have been meeting with. I think today, counting this meeting, is my 5th meeting about water this week. So we're working on how we take the strategic plan and implement that a little more clearly in code, and working with the strike force and making sure that we're looking at all of that data. Specifically, I'm also running one is a legislative bill, the other is a pilot program that probably won't need legislation. The bill I'm working on is around data centers and their water use. Right now, data centers are everywhere with the explosion of AI. This is a technology that's coming. They like our ecosystem in Utah economically. They like our everything about being in Utah, where we are in elevation and how they can cool their systems and how they work. But we need more information about what they're doing with our water. And so we're looking at reporting and transparency and some upfront kinds of conversations. So that's in the works. That's most
awesome,
of what that's most of what we're looking at right now, and we have some people weighing in on the specifics on the Great Salt Lake language.
Amazing, thank you. Jake, would love to hear about what you're up to with the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, which I think is like the hottest, coolest thing that not enough people know about. So tell us about your work and why it's so foundational to this whole conversation.
So the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan was funded from the Utah legislature a few years ago. They gave our department funding and said, we are really in need of taking all the available data and information and knowledge and relationships with people throughout the basin so that we can get this holistic view of the basin, which is again something which you know as working in this area and dealing with some of these problems, I think, wow, it would have been really great if someone had done this 20 years ago, but they haven't, and so we're doing it now. And it's also important to recognize that folks like Darren and Ogden City do an exceptional job here in thinking about the future and needs of infrastructure and supplying good, clean, quality water. Sometimes they're so, their budgets, their constituents are focused on a limited geographic region. And so they're not thinking about the bigger picture. So that's where the state and Division of Water Resources can play an important role in facilitating this type of large-scale basin-wide thinking. So we also got a few $1 million from the, so we got $5 million from the state legislature, and then $3 million from the Bureau of Reclamation. And as part of the integrated plan, what we're doing is developing a tool, which is a model which allows us to look at future situations or scenarios and make changes in the watershed that would be unrealistic or far too expensive to implement, only to test out what would the results be. So we're building this tool and then working through a process where we involve water suppliers and water users and water interests to identify what does a successful future look like. What is victory for us in 50 years, in 100 years? And the integrated plan will become a playbook built up by water users throughout the Great Salt Lake watershed to help us reach that kind of victory in the future. Does that sound good?
That sounds really good, yeah. I think that is another key point, is like so many people say, save Great Salt Lake, but like what do we mean by that? There are so many different considerations. Are we talking about the salinity? Are we talking about tamping down dust? Are we, there's a need for greater specificity and clarity, I think, in what we mean by that. So thank you for highlighting that. The Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan recently published their Municipal and Industrial Conservation Opportunities Report, which highlighted the need for stronger regional and state water planning, and said that the current approach of water planning at the local level is not sustainable. So really just this highlighting the need for stronger regional collaboration. And Jake, I'm curious if you could just take us a little bit further into the weeds and maybe share some of the reality of what you've been met with as you're digging into this space, trying to get folks to collaborate. Like, what are some of the challenges, or maybe just kind of help us understand how people were thinking about this before, the Great Salt Lake has pushed us into, okay, now it's time to collaborate at a deeper level. Because it's not easy getting all these new people working together.
Yeah, so there are, there's a lot I could say. In one sense, there's some confusion, like popular confusion and about certain numbers, like you showed on your slide. In some instances there are groups which disagree about the numbers, and so that's problematic because a lot of the numbers are objective. And so by developing this tool and process, what we hope to get is cohesion, like shared understanding on these numbers, so that we all can have this common calculator, and that will allow focus on arguments over what really should be argued about, which are certain values, about who we want to be as a society, how do we want to utilize our resources, who benefits, what are the trade-offs that we're willing to take, and those are really good arguments, but shouldn't be muddled by the numbers. So that's one thing that we'll be able to achieve through this. Another challenge is for us, we don't hold water rights, we don't manage reservoirs, we don't control water supplies. That's all done at a local level, at a municipal level, or at a district level, or an irrigation company. And so what that means is we rely on building relationships of trust, understanding what do they need, what are they afraid of in the future, what kind of statutory changes do they need, what kind of financial support do they need, what are their goals, and bringing that together. And so it really only works. And this is part of the challenge. Is we have really smart people on our team. We get smart people. We can get the data, crunch the numbers, and find the optimal future, to meet everyone's needs. But then you have to actually make that happen. And so the only way to do that is to involve this social component. And that means we need people, like Darren, Mayor Nadolsky, and his team. We need to get all those people. And like you showed those numbers, there are hundreds of cities. There are multiple districts. There are millions of people. There are, these vast wetland areas. And so how do you organize and this many people and get these insights and understand the trade-offs? It's hard to do. And another challenge is that people have limited time.
Yeah.
So even if they can contribute some, they're working on a whole host of other problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Darren, I have been so encouraged talking to you and hearing you speak at the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. I will be honest, when I first got into the Great Salt Lake space as a community organizer, there was kind of this idea that the water districts don't care about conservation, they only care about themselves, they don't care about the lake. And then I started talking to them and I'm like, wait, these people care more than most everyone else I'm talking to. So it's really been cool getting to know you, and would love to hear from you just what your work with cities has been like. I know that's something we've talked about. The district is on board, trying to push these conservation goals. You're acutely aware of our supply challenges, and sometimes cities are just like, oh, that's not my problem. So I'd love to hear about, what not Ogden City, of course, but it's challenging. You can have goals as a district, but you've got to coordinate with cities. We'd love to hear what that's looked like, or what just the challenges have been.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Ogden City is not part of what I'm going to talk about next.
No, he's named Ogden City as a hero, so just put that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it is a challenge, right? I mean, we have, 50 cities that we deliver drinking water to from our treatment plants or from our wells. And so there's a lot of coordination that needs to take place, right, to make sure that we're all on the same page. I mean, we meet with all of our cities once a year and talk about a lot of these issues, priorities for Weber Basin, things that we feel like are important within the district. And then we felt like with the Flip Your Strip program, if cities wanted to participate in that program and have district funds go to help offset those costs and pay folks for flipping their strip, then as a carrot, we would say that they would need to participate, to reduce their landscape or to reduce their water uses in the landscape. So they would adopt basically landscape ordinances that we would push for them to be able to adopt these ordinances. And so that was just kind of a carrot that we had out there, and we have, it worked in a lot of cases. Residents were calling saying, hey, I want to participate in the Flip Your Strip. I want to try to reduce my water use. And then we would have cities call us and say, hey, your residents or our residents are beating us up saying they can't participate in your Flip Your Strip. We need you to allow them to participate in that, even if we don't approve your landscape ordinances. And we're saying, that's not the way this works. You have to approve the ordinance first for them to. So basically we got team members on our team who are residents of the cities, beating up the cities to say, hey, we need to move this forward. And it's not like, they're hugely restrictive. Anything 8 feet or less should not have turf. No more than 35% turf in the front or side yards. We're not even going into the backyard at this point. So, and then some other additional things as far as ordinances are concerned. And for the most part, it's been well received. I mean, some cities say, we like the way our city looks. We like the greenery, the lush look of our city. We really don't want to, participate. And we just said, well, I know you like how it looks. Everybody likes how it looks, right? But we can't continue to perpetuate that moving forward. We just don't have the water supply. I hate to basically pay for turf, that's going to be torn out here and pay for that to be torn out that's being put in. It doesn't make any sense today to do that, to pay for turf, in 5 years it's being put in today. Let's not do that. Let's be sensible and smart about how our new construction develops. Otherwise, we're just, cutting off our arm despite our face type thing. We're not making any progress here by doing that. And so that was one of the programs that we've been involved with to help the cities. And to be honest, sometimes sitting in city council meetings or planning commissions, unless there's a zoning change, happening, there's not a lot of residents that are sitting in those meetings just listening in general, right? If there's an issue that they're concerned about, they'll be there. But for the most part, they're not really well attended at times. And so I know people are busy. Everybody has their own lives. They've got their own priorities. Everybody's moving forward. And so it's not to blame anybody here. It's just the fact of the matter. Everybody has busy lives, and it's difficult to cover all the bases all the time. But we feel like it's, especially the last 4 or 5 years, our board and staff has really been concerned about who are we selling water to? Are they using the water appropriately? And so we've really decreased how much water we allocate per parcel here. Starting about 2 years ago, we've really decreased how much water we'll sell to an individual, regardless of their lot size. We cap it at a certain acre footage. That's all the water you're going to get. I don't care if you have a half acre, 2 acre lot. This is all you're getting. And so that was not popular among those that we retail water to. Now, we can't do that. The cities have to do that in their own, but where we have jurisdiction as far as our retail customers, we're able to dictate that. And so we've really decreased how much water is being allocated. Now, eventually, we might not have to push the allocation moving forward with all the secondary water meters that are going in. We hope to eventually not even necessarily allocate water but just bill for every gallon that goes through the meter. And so we'll have to see how that develops. But I mean, that's one of the things we face in this
no,
department.
thank you. Something we've talked about too that's a challenge is that oftentimes with city councils, like water's pretty complicated and it takes time to understand enough to feel like you can make a decision. And with city council members that are sometimes in and out every 4 years, it's like to bring them up to speed and then they're out. And so that's tricky too, is like how do we educate them and help them understand how critical this is. Mayor Nadolsky, you have a pretty unique background as far as mayors go with your water experience, your state agency experience, and I know you came into office with a plan to really do something big with water. Would love to hear about that. I think it just exemplifies this sort of like cross-sector, cross-governmental level collaboration that we need more of.
Sure. And one of the experiences I didn't mention in my introduction is part of my career was spent working in legislative affairs. So I did that in the Herbert and Cox administrations, and when you work for the Division of Wildlife, you deal with a ton of controversy. People don't recognize or realize just how much conflict there is out there around wildlife, because wildlife occupy a lot of different landscapes, including landscapes that people are relying on to grow food and fiber and to put food on the table for their families. And so it's really important when you work in that space to be open-minded, to be collaborative, and to have a spirit of problem solving. And so when I got this job, and this was an idea that I floated during the campaign, but I'll be honest, it was a pretty heady idea, I think. And it was like I needed some more access to more expertise to kind of vet this thing. But before I did that, I went to the Capitol, I think probably on like day 3 in office. And I got a meeting with Speaker of the House, Speaker Mike Schultz. And love him or hate him, the dude understands public lands and public lands policy. He's been working in that space for a long time. And so I had worked with him a lot in other issues in the past. And I went to him and I said, dude, I've got an idea. I want to pulse check you on this and see where you're at before I go too far, because I need some help from some experts. Legislative session was kicking off in like a month, right? And I said, with my background in biology and fisheries and working with the experts at the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program, I know that they talk about needing water in certain spots at certain times, delivered very specifically. And I know that Ogden City is sitting on a lot of very senior water rights, that we are not using all of it and we're holding it for future growth. And I would like to leverage that and put it in, instead of keeping it in storage, why don't we keep it in storage in the lake as a beneficial use? And in exchange, can you help me build a pipeline that's leaking, by some estimates, again, we don't have complete agreement on the numbers, up to 3 to 5 million gallons per day of water. If I could help, this is a $100 million water line project that starts at Pineview Reservoir, goes under the reservoir, under the highway, down the canyon, into our distribution system, and it also goes through our water treatment plant. This is a very complicated generational project. It's almost 100 years old. And this thing is on the brink of collapse and failure. So this is a very mission critical drinking water supply for our whole city, has to happen. And I need help paying for it, because the more help I get, the less I have to put that on the backs of people that are already struggling to put food on the table. He said, finally, a local elected official is coming with a solution and offering something for the people of the state of Utah. How many times are you up there and you have people just asking you for money, asking you for handouts, and begging for this, that, and the other? Well, I came and I offered something in return. And that's an important point. Darren just used the term carrot. In Utah, I just speak from experience. I worked on a sage-grouse issue. Anybody knows what a sage-grouse is? You know that it tastes terrible, and it also is a highly conflicted bird. It occupies expanses of 11 western states. That's 11 governors, all with different politics and different platforms, different priorities and policies. And we had to find a way, and I was able to represent Utah at the table through the Western Governors Association. I'm trying to find land use policies that work, especially work for producers, agricultural producers. If we're alienating producers, you guys, we are alienating our greatest friends and allies in this whole thing.
Hear, hear.
Okay, so if you see a farmer, thank him, and do not alienate him, because we cannot succeed without him. And that's something that's lost in translation too much. I digress.
We could do a whole panel on that, and we might, so stay tuned.
But the point is, what I learned in that whole sage-grouse experience is that the state of Utah operates on something that we call the voluntary and incentive-based approach. Human nature, and I can speak to this raising a couple teenage daughters right now, they don't like being forced and hit over the head telling you, you will do this or else. It's just human nature. People resist that approach. And it happens in politics and in policy, and it is absolutely ingrained in Utah culture. And if you can adopt a mindset of a voluntary and incentive-based approach, like you talked about, Darren, with having an incentive to participate in the program, voluntarily, you will get way more uptake. I promise you. And that was the approach that I brought to the speaker that he loved. As I said, I would like to voluntarily give you, lease to you, in the state of Utah, our water rights for 15 years, for 1,500 acres per year, acre feet of water per year, if you will help me pay for it. So the legislature approved $10 million with the help of Senator Musselman. He was an absolute dog on behalf of Ogden City. That dude went to battle for us because he believed in what we were doing. And that's the approach that works in Utah politics, you guys. And I'm not going to dismiss activism because some of the greatest wins in the history of our nation were on the backs of activism. But it isn't always the answer. And I'm just telling you that there are a ton of people at the Capitol that want to fill that lake, and they need our help. And what they don't need is all of us screaming down their throat and screaming their hair back, telling them how stupid they are or how much they're screwing up. They need our help with solutions and ideas. And when I brought one, I'm telling you guys, they freaking latched onto that and ran with it. And now I've heard, and maybe you could speak to it more, but there's other water districts that have actually participated in the same thing. What we ended up doing was agreeing to deliver 15 years of water for 1,500 acre feet per year in exchange for $10 million that we're putting into our water line. And because we are a collaborative bunch, we can call on our friends at Weber Basin to help us exchange our water rights from Willard Bay up to Pineview and store the water higher. Or was it the other way around?
No, that's how it was.
Right? And then we were able to release that water from Willard Bay, that was the exchange,
Yes.
from Willard Bay into Willard Spur at a time of our choosing, which we help identify with the help of the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program, so that we catch the botulism outbreak as it's starting to ramp up. And then we try and dilute the botulism with an input and a pulse of fresh water, and it cuts the peak off of the botulism outbreak. So now we're hitting Endangered Species Act implications, we're hitting waterfowl and shorebird management implications, we're hitting water conservation implications, infrastructure improvements, etc., right? These are the kinds of ideas, you guys, that if we bring to the table, lawmakers love them because it's a solution instead of just bitching at them about how much they suck. Like,
Oh, we love that.
right?
It works, right? Yeah.
They need help, they need answers, they need solutions, and none of it works if you don't have producers with you as well.
Yeah.
We love the solutions. Another solution, if I can just jump
Please
in
go,
on this
yeah.
too. I talked briefly in my introduction about a pilot program that we're hoping to start. Some of our biggest water users are our municipalities and our school districts. And the number one thing Darren mentioned that we need to do is conserve what we're using outside. We can cut back 30%. We can deliver a lot of water to the lake. We're working on that delivery piece and how we actually get that saved water to the lake. And that is a challenge, but those are some of the things that we're working on right now. A couple of years ago, a bill was passed for a pilot program in our schools, but there was no funding to help them convert their outdoor irrigation systems. So think about this. You're a busy elementary school janitor. You go outside, you turn the sprinklers on, you go inside, you have 52 things that hit you right in the face as you walk inside. 6 hours later, you realize that sprinkler is still running outside. It's a reality in many, many, many of our schools. Their systems are not automated. If we can just automate some of those systems around the state, we can be smarter in how we're using our water. So we're looking for some private partnership dollars to be able to move the needle on those kinds of things. And that will be one of the pilot programs that we're hoping to roll out this year.
I have an idea for you.
Oh, we should talk.
Speaking of private partnership dollars, this was going to be my last question for you, Representative Koford, before opening it up to the audience. You are in some, a lot of decision-making spaces. You kind of have a peek behind the curtain with the legislature, the governor, this new Great Salt Lake Rising initiative. And I would just love to hear from your perspective, not that you have like the crystal ball, but as we head into this next legislative session, I think there's a lot of uncertainty. It's like on on the one hand, okay, the governor has, refocused our attention on Great Salt Lake. Are they going to do a whole lot of things? We also know that there are a lot of legislators who are resistant to basic things like limiting non-functional turf, things like that. I think there's also a lot of skepticism. People believe that, we have a lot of developers in our legislature. So when it comes to balancing water conservation and growth, I've just heard a lot of dismay among the community. But I'm just curious to get your pulse. Do you sense kind of a renewed focus or interest on the lake as we head into this next session?
The simple answer is yes.
Yeah.
I think that there is a huge appetite, and maybe I'm not the most objective, because I think this is the single most important issue facing our state right now. If we don't get Great Salt Lake right, we lose so much. I just don't think I can overstate that. And there are many of us that are very concerned and working on this. I came in with a group of about 19 freshmen, and no jokes about being the world's oldest freshman, because I'm not, but I'm close. But my freshman class is concerned about this. I talked to a friend who lives down in southern Utah County, and he is concerned about Great Salt Lake. He's in the Colorado River Basin, but he is coming to me continually. Can we talk about the lake? I have colleagues from across the aisle coming to me and saying, can we run some legislation? Can we talk about this, about the lake? And so I am seeing that renewed interest and that renewed commitment. And I'm a little bit of a pit bull, and I think this is an important issue, and so I'm very loud about it, and I'm recruiting people to help us work on it. But certainly with Great Salt Lake Rising and that commitment, the Great Salt Lake Compact, which I couldn't sign fast enough, there's a level of excitement that we haven't seen for many, many years. And the people that brought that group together, I walked into a meeting about a month ago, and the excitement was palpable. And I don't mean to overstate that. I'm hoping that we can turn that into real meaningful action. I don't think that we have a lot of big policy levers to pull. We have some fine-tuning of the policy that's already in place. We have some fine-tuning of water banking. We have some fine-tuning of some of these programs that we can hopefully pull in some private dollars to help fund. If you talk to Jerry Stevenson this year, last year it was a socks and underwear year. I think this year we may be washing socks and underwear. We might be looking for needle and thread to darn our socks and underwear. The budget doesn't look great. And so, but having a group of people that are really passionate, that want to partner with the state, we're at a moment where I think we can make a real difference.
That's encouraging. I think, and just kind of what you've highlighted, like there is not any big lever to pull when it comes to Great Salt Lake, whether that's at the legislative level, at the agricultural level, at the municipal level. Like there's not some bucket of water where it's just like, oh, if we sign this paper, then, we'll fill it up. It's like it's going to be little things over time, constantly iterating for the rest of time here in Utah. So I think that's just something to appreciate. Like this is a long-term effort, and our sustained engagement is really important. So with that, let's open it up to audience Q&A. Maya has got a microphone. Raise your hand and she will bring it to you. Do we have 2 mics? Okay, so just raise your hand and a mic will come to you. And if you could just introduce yourself and state your question.
Hi, my name is Dagny Signorelli, and I'm sure that y'all are familiar with the research that came out in April of 2025 by Richter et al. Reducing irrigation of livestock feed is essential for saving the Great Salt Lake. So I'd like to know what you're doing to help producers conserve water.
Love that question. I don't know who wants to take that first. I've got some things to say as well.
Okay, so there's multiple efforts, right? There's soil conservation, federal soil conservation programs, but the state has what's called an agricultural water optimization program. There's an ag water optimization task force, which has various legislators, water managers, producers, farm bureau folks who partner with universities, particularly the extension program at Utah State University, to look at how implementing different types of irrigation can all reduce the amount of water that is applied or the amount of water that's consumed, while also increasing crop yields. And so that's a big program that requires farmers to put in money into that program to get the technology or infrastructure, whether that's converting from flood to sprinkler, drip in some areas, risers, lining canals, those types of water efficiency or water savings programs. And then there's a couple of programs. The Office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner is also working closely with that program, so that water that is saved or through the ag efficiency programs, that water can be dedicated for the lake and delivered to it. And that there's been quite a bit of success in that program.
Mayor Nadolsky, you wanted to say something on that too?
I was going to say, just reflecting on some of my past work, if you think about the life of a producer, we're not talking about families that are cash wealthy most of the time. Maybe they've got land wealth, but they don't have cash in pocket oftentimes. And if we put a slap a requirement on them that they do all of these efficiency upgrades because of the finding in the report, which is important, they're not going to be able to afford it. But if that's what the law says they have to do, what do you think they're going to have to do in response? They're going to have to sell it. And who do you think is going to buy it? Developers are going to buy it. So if you guys care about open space and healthy landscapes and recreating out in open space, you want to help these producers conserve and protect their property and make sure that they stay solvent in their operation. And that's what the state's proposing and doing with this program, is they're giving them options and access to infrastructure upgrades with some skin in the game too, right? But what happens is they achieve enormous efficiencies in their production operation. And now we have opportunities, and this is what I worked with Paul Burnett at Trout Unlimited and former Representative Tim Hawks when he was the state director of Trout Unlimited. They created lease opportunities for in-stream flows. So now you can go and work with a producer who voluntarily wants to participate because there's an incentive-based outcome at the end. And then we can capture that efficiency, maybe even purchase the water that they would have used otherwise and put it back into our stream as an in-stream flow, right? Because that's now beneficial use, right? And then that water makes it down to the Great Salt Lake. So those are the kinds of things that we can do conceptually and in real world. We're doing it on the ground and in our landscapes to help producers become more efficient and effective in their use while conserving the water and then putting it into a beneficial use for the resources that we all love and making sure that those lands remain open spaces.
So this about a couple weeks ago, one more thing. Sometimes you'll drive by a field and maybe wonder why they're just spraying or not using a pivot or whatever I know we can get a little judgmental about our neighbors or sprinkler use or even our farmers and their sprinkler use. And something that I learned just recently from Hannah, who's the associate director, or help me with her title.
Great Salt Lake Commissioner.
She's the deputy Great Salt Lake Commissioner. Thank you. Sorry, finding the right words. It's been a long day. We're very, very intentional about where we're doing the ag optimization too. You may not see all of that in Weber County, but you may see it in Utah County because of the soil, because of all of the data that we've collected. Some of that water has to go down to the aquifer and it needs to continue to go the way it is. So the great thing is that ag wants to be our partners. We can't do this without ag, and they're part of the solution is what we're finding.
Yeah, and I mean, not only can we not do it without them, we can't do it because even if we limited all the agriculture, that's not going to necessarily save the lake. And I think another important, sometimes we get to work with irrigators and partner with them, so I learn a lot, which is interesting. But, I had a burger and milkshake this lunch and I was craving In-N-Out, so I'm probably going to hit In-N-Out on the way home and get another burger and milkshake. And so it's always easy to say those folks are using water, but that water is making burgers and milkshakes. And so that's really valuable.
You want milkshakes or do you want a lake? Just it's not a binary.
But there's, they're producing something, whereas when we're growing grass and going around on our ride mower, we just throwing that in the garbage can, right? So it's like, what is the social benefit? And there's, it also, dealing with region, with climate and soil and water availability. It's not, you can't just choose whatever crop you want. And a lot of these producers, they could switch from grass or alfalfa to vegetables or other types of produce, but can be an economic structural problem. So they need to have buyers, right? They need to be able to, someone that can transport that. They need to have a mill, someplace that can, produce or package or can whatever the food they're producing. And so it's, there's these complexities. And then, when COVID hits and just like prices spike because we're not getting bananas or whatever, we see that having local food, like food that's produced in our region, has benefits. And so there are these added, it's not just the water, it's these added pieces.
Yeah, like I said, and not to beat a dead horse here, but I think this is such a critical topic. I think agriculture has problems that are much bigger than Great Salt Lake, and so now we're also asking agriculture to help us save Great Salt Lake when so many farmers are in debt. The alfalfa farmers are not billionaires like many people think they are. Only a quarter of the alfalfa is exported. Not to say that we shouldn't look at what crops we should be growing here. I would love to see an agricultural future in Utah where we are growing food that stays here that we eat, because frankly the burger from In-N-Out, like, that's not coming from here. So I think there's this disconnect between what we are producing here and where it's going, and I think a lot of us don't feel the benefits of that. Not to say that that can't be a future that we have, but it needs massive investment and massive intentionality. This is an idea that I brought forward to Speaker Schultz, that we need a vision for the future of Utah agriculture, because I think in the conversation about water in Great Salt Lake, it's like I've heard people say, do we need ag or do we not? And it's like, we can't make it a binary like that. And also, of course, we need food. I don't know if you guys have looked at the food system globally, but it is a collapsing disaster. So like, we really need to become more resilient locally, but that's going to take massive intentionality and investment that goes beyond the scope of just the Great Salt Lake issue. So again, we could do a whole panel on that, and we probably should. But any other questions? Yeah, Maya with the mic will come.
Thank you. Marshall Cooper Smith. On these data plants and data centers and similar things that use a lot of water, we should probably require anyone building new ones to buy twice the water rights that they're going to need. One half of it will be for their use, the other half will go to the Great Salt Lake. That's the first part.
Interesting. I'm not opposed to having conversations. We're going to ask them up front how much they plan to use, what that use and consumption actually looks like. You have diversions, then you have consumption, and then you have, help me with the return flows, then you have your return flows. So we want them to get to a net zero if possible.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're pushing. But first we have to know what they're using, and we don't even know that yet. So this is a work in progress. So I'll let you know when you can all come to the Capitol and listen to the really riveting testimony and help me get the bill passed.
And that's probably in addition to the net increase, in case they get, let's say an acre foot was used on that property before, they're going to go to 11, then they'd have to do at 10, and then 10 to 20. Okay. The second thing kind of related to that is especially high energy users, and I know it's not related, but they should have to pay not the average rate, but they should pay for the highest rate of cost of electricity that they're being used. Those based on a cost to increase it from, let's say, 1 billion kilowatts to 1.5 billion acres. That last 500 million kilowatt hours. Does that make sense? And it's kind of to help prevent us from having to pay for the increase that they're using that makes electricity rates go up.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Let's keep it to questions if we can.
So we've had a great conversation kind of towards municipal and industrial water sector. There's a whole other part that I think is a big factor in the Great Salt Lake, and it has to do with our stormwater. Right now, the state has an 80% on-site retention requirement for all new development going on. And so when we look at that, we're now requiring the change to, retain 80% of that water on site. As Darren mentioned earlier, and I know Dr. Erin Rivers did some studies when she did her time at Utah State, how much when we store that water in these smaller detention ponds, then it goes from how much evapotranspiration we lose from that. We're seeing a lot more of the 100 and 500 year storm than these smaller storms. And maybe Representative Koford, and Mayor Nadolsky, this kind of a look from your two. I know Representative Peterson's looking at running a bill this year to try and walk that back a little bit. Just some thoughts on that a little bit.
Tom and I have been talking about this a lot. It was one of the first water things I brought up when I came into the legislature is what about retention and detention? How is that impacting this? And people haven't really wanted to talk about it. So I'm really grateful to Tom for stepping into this. He and I have been working on it. He's leading the charge. I'm in second position trying to help him on that. I think you're going to see probably some data collection on that so we really understand what's happening. Water, if you haven't noticed, water is really complex. So we are aware of that. We're talking about it. We're pushing the conversation. We're trying to understand exactly how that's impacting what the flows are and where it's going. So thank you for the question.
So I'm not going to say too much like I know what I'm talking about on this one. I know a little bit, enough to be dangerous. But my executive director of public services is sitting in the back and he knows a ton about this. And I do know that of all of our utilities, our stormwater one is probably the least advanced and that we need to keep doing more upgrades in. I don't think the intent, as I understand the models for stormwater, the intent is not to store water on site long term. It's to hold it long enough to attenuate the flood so that it can be conveyed through the system, through the infrastructure upgrades into our river systems, which we view rivers one way. We also should consider them a storm conveyance system in part as well. And so we need to have stormwater systems that are connected to the storage point short term so that we're not losing all the evaporation. It goes into our river system in a way that's cleaned and polished before it goes in, which are some of the infrastructure upgrades we're making here in the city. So we're really focusing on that to make sure that we're putting clean water into our rivers so that when it gets to the lake, it's clean. But what cities need help with are the infrastructure upgrades that takes. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to do this, you guys. That's no police, that's a emergency response that you're hearing outside the door. None of that for 10 years, if that's what I'm tasked with doing financially. It's not reasonable or achievable. And so that's where the state's resources and sometimes federal resources can come into play. We would not be doing the water line if we didn't have the help of the state and of the feds, period. Not without jacking water rates on people to the point that they would be literally having to sell their home to go elsewhere. So if we're looking at doing that kind of work, local communities need help with infrastructure.
One additional piece is part of the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. We did a study looking at the impact of stormwater retention, mostly kind of small scale, not the large detention basins, but how the kind of small, low impact development type approach, how that impacts water flows to Great Salt Lake. And so generally there is a decrease, though it's not very significant. But it is a good question because the main purpose for that is to reduce flooding that's caused by building impervious surfaces, but also to improve water quality. And that may have an effect that we don't want of limiting flows to the lake. But in general, the flows to the lake that really matter is spring runoff. That's like 90% of the flows reaching the lake it comes from snow melt, and so that's what's critical. The smaller storms, there's still some questions certainly that we need to investigate, but yeah, generally not a big effect on Great Salt Lake anyway.
Mayor Porter, Russ Porter, South Ogden City Mayor. My question is, what can the average person hear? What can I put in my newsletter? Give me two most important things that the average homeowner citizen can do to stay in Great Salt Lake. Before you answer, why are you thinking that? South Ogden just automated all of our park sprinklers. You'll be happy to know that.
Thank you. So don't say that. We were going to. And that'll be our last question from the audience. Thank you.
So the number one thing from my perspective is to conserve your outdoor water use. It's great and we just can't stop. We had a couple of good water years and I think everybody was like, oh, we're good. And we all started watering again. We don't need as much water as we think we need on that grass, on that turf. If you can pull it out, re-landscape. But yeah, cut back. If all of us could cut back 30% of what we're watering outside and our grass doesn't need it, we can do it. I also think, I read this somewhere, that there's some new seed that's being developed from Utah State. I would love, I mean, if we could overseed with that, or if you're putting in a new yard, use grass. Don't use Kentucky bluegrass. Use something that takes less water.
Yeah, Tahoma 31 is what one variety of the Bermuda grass that we would push forward. And we've got a big plot out at Weber Basin. You can come walk on it, play on it, take a look at it, see what you think. So there's a huge kind of half of our park area kind of there is Tahoma 31. The other thing I would say is, just like the representative said, yes, conserve your outdoor water use. I think that's the biggest message here. So I'm chairman of the board of Southwood Water Improvement District. It's a small water district. I do that in my free time just to help the community because I love this so much. But as I look at water use, and I'm not, and this is throughout the system, but as I looked at the top 20 water use, how much water they're using, typically we want to see about 3 acre-feet or 36 inches of water applied to a landscape should suffice for the year. The top 20 users in that system were using 10 feet of water on their landscapes.
Too much.
Way too much. And it's not just in Weber Basin, all of our folks have the same issue. And when we start billing for every gallon, that's going to be really, those folks are going to fund our capital improvement projects, right? Because
$600 million.
there's just a disregard for how much water is being used outdoors. Every time you run your sprinklers one time, you're using 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of water. Most people don't realize how much water they're applying through their sprinklers outdoors, which is equal to how much water you use in a month indoors in an average family. So we just need folks to understand that the individual here in municipal, living in cities, what they can do is reduce outdoor water use. That's the biggest thing we can do. What that does is that conserves water, that creates more water up in the reservoirs, so then in the spring they spill earlier and they spill more to the Great Salt Lake. But that conserved water stays in the reservoirs so that it spills earlier that next spring and that water gets to the lake. That's how we can help save the Great Salt Lake.
Awesome. Jake?
Yeah, one additional thing is, I think one is coming to the recognition, the reality that one homeowner can do very little to save Great Salt Lake. There's not even one entity in the basin that could save the Great Salt Lake. And that is, that may be daunting, but that's also exciting because you see that we're all together in this and it's really collaborative. So if you've worked on maximizing, reducing water use in your own property, then you can help your neighbor, or you can join, visit your city council or your planning, the planning council or what have you to help. They may not want to have ordinances of low, non-functional turf and those types of things. So I think there's a lot of things that you can do to one, your own property, but then you can get your neighbors in your neighborhood and be collective, because that's ultimately what it takes. What it will take is this whole, all of us working together.
Thank you. And last, Mayor Nadolsky, one thing people can do.
I want to add my voice to what Darren said, but I'll also say I want to lift up what Mayor Porter just said. If the entire city of South Ogden is automated for all of their parks, I don't think we recognize just how much conservation just happened. And I want to tell you that for Ogden City, we've got like 30-something parks. I don't think any of them are automated, and I'm telling you that's costing us a lot in personnel dollars, that's personal services, that's ongoing expense, that's tax burden on people. 2, we are using more water than we need because we don't have automation. And 3, I could save more water in one move than probably 1,000 homes in their outdoor use altogether with one project. Just like we did with the water line in this canyon, we saved so much water being lost in that one project. I don't know how the exact numbers, but what you just said, we could probably eliminate 1,000 homes in their outdoor water use for their entire every day in one project. So there are big savings to be had. And unfortunately, the conversations in politics don't really highlight those opportunities and the things that are being done. And I just want to tell you that if I'm going to give you advice for one thing, it's to help hold on to common sense. Someone asked me, I think it was Ian, before the thing, hey man, what's your biggest challenge on getting things done? I'm like, it's holding on to common sense, you guys. Because when we are left and we are right, and we are fighting about this, that, and the other, and we're doing it on election cycles, in order to do it with talking points and rhetoric, we are losing sight of common sense. And common sense is where solutions are, you guys.
And humanity. Like, that's not a human process.
Right. So if I could give you one piece of advice, please allow for and support and seek fact above fiction, and help us hold on to common sense so we can actually solve the problem instead of fighting about it in the headlines and getting absolutely nothing done. Because I'm telling you, we have people in positions of power, including in South Ogden, including on the city council, that want to solve this. But it's going to cost us tens of millions of dollars to make those upgrades. That's why I was really interested in the program you mentioned earlier.
We're probably going to have a conversation right now.
Thank you guys so much. We have sadly got to wrap up, but I just want to give you guys a chance. If there's anything you feel like we haven't covered yet that you want the audience to walk away with, anything you hope to see in this Great Salt Lake waterwork, now's your chance.
Yeah, we've toured around lakes and waterways around the West, looked at issues that we're facing. We've learned about saline lakes around the world, and I think a lot of people I talk to are kind of scared for the future. And me being in this world, working with these types of people, seeing all the work that's being done, seeing all the advances in technology and the research and the collaborative efforts and the willingness to change and learn, I have nothing but hope. So it is really like, this is a problem. We have problems, but we're solving them. And in the future, it's going to be a better place.
Love it. Go ahead, Representative.
I would just say, some folks say, why don't you just release more water? Then we'd have more water for the Great Salt Lake. And I'm saying I can't just release water, right? It belongs to the ratepayers, the contract holders. And so I can't just release water. In fact, all of our reservoirs combined, up in the mountains, we hold a little over 500,000 acre feet. If I released when they're full on June 1st, if I released all that water to the Great Salt Lake, it would last 3 months in the Great Salt Lake, and then it would be gone due to evaporation, okay? So then what are we gonna do? And what are we gonna drink once I release all that water in the Great Salt Lake? So we know that that's foolish, that doesn't make any sense, but that's why this is a holistic approach, how we all have to be involved, how we can't be afraid to get out there and speak our minds, but that makes with common sense. But we can't just go with the flow. I mean, we've got to get out there and say, hey, I want to make a change. I want to do something different. I want to be part of the solution here. I think that's critical that we understand the issue and then we want to be part of the solution. And so appreciate you all for being here tonight. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you. Representative Koford?
I just really want to echo what Jake said. I am really hopeful. I haven't been this hopeful for a long time. We have so many people that care about this issue. We have some of the best and brightest minds working on it. We have people who are determined to pull the right levers. But it's going to take time, and we have to be patient. I would love to fill the lake like that overnight, just like Darren said. It's not going to happen. This is a slow and steady and methodical and thoughtful process, but I've never been more hopeful.
Mayor Nadolsky, this is your city. I think it's right that you have the last word.
Okay, careful.
I'm inspired, so yeah, keep it up.
I sit up in my seat.
Yeah.
I get sporty and spicy, I guess. My apologies in advance, but I want to use this last moment to just say that I want to tell you a story that you wouldn't know if I didn't just say it here. And I want to thank Chandler and thank Stewardship Utah for something. Not just for hosting this event, but we had some pretty spicy conversations, didn't we?
Oh, we did. No.
Right? So I got an email.
It wasn't an easy yes. Yeah.
Right. I get, not because I don't care about the issue, because I didn't trust her organization. Okay? And there's a reason for that. I'm like, hey, dude, I'm not an idiot. I know what Stewardship Utah is and what it used to be. And I don't forget the hate mail. I don't forget the talking points and the rhetoric that tried to make sure that I failed. People don't forget that stuff, you guys. And so when she called and asked me to be a collaborator and to host something like this and be a leader in the region for Utah, I was like, pound sand, lady. right? Because you're here to hurt me, and you are going to set me back from actually solving problems, right? But she's like, I actually think that you are onto the cusp of some solutions, and I'd like to talk to you about how we're pivoting as well to be more collaborative. And we've had, I don't know how many conversations you had with me and my chief of staff in my office. We sat at the Capitol in the Rotunda having more conversations. And we got to a point through talking to each other, like, okay, I'm the one to give you a chance. You screw me, I'm gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt.
Did I? No.
But she didn't, right? And this is the point, you guys. We are not solving problems because we are pointing fingers at each other as though we're the problem, and we're not. This building alone, right here, this entire campus for the Union Station, I am 100% aligned and agreed with everything the Save the Union Station group wants to achieve. 100%. Yet they haven't pivoted yet out of activism and into collaboration and problem solving and results, impact. So I would just tell you guys, find areas where you have alignment and opportunity with people and decision makers and people that are in positions of power and help them succeed. Recognize when you no longer need to be an activist and you can be a collaborator and a problem solver. And I'm telling you, the fear and the anxiety that you mentioned, I hear about it all the time too. I don't feel it because the number one thing that gets rid of fear and anxiety is work. And when you are working on a solution and actually achieving results like we are, that fear and anxiety goes away. And you start to feel hope, you feel optimism, you feel energy and excitement. And then organizations pivot because they see opportunity for collaboration for real results. So I want to commend you not only for hosting this tonight, but for being the kind of leader that recognizes the need to pivot, because that pivot is where the results lie. And I would just challenge everybody, look for that moment, look for those people, and look for that opportunity. And when you do that, you will find wins.
Thank you so much. Give it up for our amazing panel, guys.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It's amazing to see the interest and intensity. And I love this panel that just showed us the momentum and the changes that are going on right now. I'm going to talk to you about what we call the Great Salt Lake Rescue. So how we're going to do this. This is bright, you guys. Welcome, high definition. So here are the stats as they sit today. More than half of the lake bed is exposed. That's around 1,000 square miles of exposed lake bed. The lake is more dry land than water. About 2/3 of the lake's water volume is gone. I think this number is important. The next one, the lake is 15 feet lower than it would be without human water diversions and depletions. That's data out of David Tarbotten's lab at Utah State. So the lake should be the size of New Hampshire. And imagine the state of New Hampshire covered in 15 feet of water. That's how much water we've lost from the lake. We've lost so much water that the crust of the earth is actually rebounding because of that. The lake has triggered a bunch of micro-earthquakes around it. And this last number we published in 2023, and it was very controversial. It remains controversial today, and I'm happy to discuss it and defend it. We remain within just a few years of losing the lake's key ecosystem functions, right? Including the salinity getting too high for the food web to maintain, losing the protection from dust, all of the things that we depend on from the lake. This is what the Bear River, the mouth of the Bear River looks like most of the year. I was actually out there on Saturday, and it is flowing, right? Once we stop our diversions, the river does start to flow again. But the main cause of the lake's decline is consumptive water use. And this is good news, right? If it was mainly climate change or the drought, we have very little ability to change those numbers in the short term right here. But we can control how much water we use. Right? So because we're the problem, we can also be the solution. Here's the breakdown of where that water use is occurring and what types of water use account for the depletions. So this is only the consumptive water use part. I want to point out about 1/3 of the water use is happening in Idaho and Wyoming. So there needs to be interstate coordination. And then about 3/4 of the water use is agricultural. I kind of round up to say cities are about 20 and mineral extraction is about 5. It's not just that we're especially bad at managing water. These lakes all around the world are in decline. Half of the world's lake water is actually in these terminal lakes. So the largest is the Caspian Sea. The second largest used to be the Aral Sea, the one right here in the middle. But nearly all of these lakes are in decline. Each dot represents one of these large saline lakes. And then the darker red it is, the more of that lake has been lost. So globally, 60% of that saline lake area has been lost. And it's very similar to what's going on here. It's outdoor irrigation. So it's lawns, it's agriculture. None of these lakes, I should have said, none of these lakes so far have been restored once they've slipped into decline. The closest that we have to a success story is Mono Lake in California and Walker Lake in Nevada. For both of those lakes, the decline was stopped, but neither of the lakes have been restored. Here's a non-rhetorical question. Why should we care? Why do you care?
Dust.
Okay, dust. So the connection with public health is really direct. Wildlife. The lake is a keystone ecosystem. The birds that come to Great Salt Lake travel to every state in the country and every country in the Western Hemisphere. Isn't that extraordinary? I mean, what we do here, if we fail or if we succeed, and I am convicted, like Representative Koford, that we are going to succeed, those positive impacts are going to ripple out through half of the planet. What else? Any other reasons?
Lake effect.
So the lake effect snow, I'll show you the data. We've long talked about between 5 and 10% of the snow in the mountains coming from the lake. We now know that nearly half of the rain and snow that falls in the valleys along the Wasatch Front comes from the lake. Imagine that. Nearly half of the rain and snow throughout the whole year comes from the lake. So the difference between Wendover and Ogden, which are pretty similar, is there's a lake in between them that's a source of water vapor that makes the climate more temperate. It increases the relative humidity and increases precipitation. So some solutions to re-engineer the lake, right? Let's cut it in half and then it'll need less water. That's what they did with the Aral Sea. And what they didn't count on was after you've cut the lake in half and you don't have that source of water vapor, you get desertification. So the first industry that got hit around the Aral Sea was farming, right? First by the decrease in precipitation, second by that dust being deposited on the agricultural fields and reducing soil fertility. So we've got to get out of our minds that it's farming versus the lake, people versus the lake, right? If we want to farm here forever, we've got to refill the lake. If we want to live here forever, if we want our descendants to live here, we've got to refill the lake. You guys aced the test, so I'll just tick through and show you some pretty pictures. The direct economic value of the lake is very high, and that's mainly from the mineral extraction from the lake. But I want to also emphasize this brine shrimp over here. Did anybody eat any delicious brine shrimp this morning for breakfast? No, we don't eat the brine shrimp directly, but they're used in the production, the global production of seafood. So those brine shrimp feed more tonnage of seafood than all of the wild-caught fish in North America. Isn't that incredible? So about half of the global table shrimp supply is supported by Great Salt Lake. And then the fertilizer, so some of that mineral extraction is potash fertilizer that's used in the Central Valley of California. So crops that we're eating today are also coming from Great Salt Lake. The lake feeds people. The destination ski resorts downwind, here's that data from a paper that came out last year showing what precipitation would be without the lake. And again, we lose nearly half of the precipitation. This is the precipitation in the valley. And then the dust storms. And we're used to seeing these time lapses of Salt Lake County, right? But we also we also see these dust clouds coming here into this valley. I live in Utah Valley. It took me a long time to get up here. I'm sorry, I was a little bit late. But this is a dust storm coming off the lake from just a few weeks ago, blowing through Orem and Provo, Utah. Right? Families are out, this is a Saturday afternoon, having barbecues. There's no warning system. Right? People look up, they're like, oh, it looks a little hazy. They don't realize that this is lake dust laced with all of these things we don't want in our bodies, as we'll hear. Now, Iran had a lake just like ours, Lake Urmia, almost exactly the same size, very similar climate. And in just a few years, after international sanctions were levied on that country because of their nuclear program, after just a few years, the lake collapsed. They diverted the rivers, tried to grow crops that weren't suited for the area, and the lake collapsed. In Tabriz, the most nearby city, which is nowhere near as close as we are to the lake, it's almost 100 miles away from the lake, they saw spikes in 41 different health conditions. And not just asthma and COPD, as important as those conditions are, right? Those are serious conditions for any of us that are suffering from them. But it was 7 kinds of cancer. It was birth defects, neurodegenerative disease, right? What we've learned from global health is that there's no separation between the health of our environment and the health of our communities. If we want to be healthy, if we want our children to be healthy, we have to have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. And the pictures of economic and environmental destruction are absolutely horrific from these lakes that have collapsed. The Aral Sea, this is a satellite image showing dust coming off the Aral Sea. This one source of dust has increased particulate matter pollution for the whole of Asia by 11%. Right? And it's the largest continent on the planet. And then this is the picture that haunts me the most. It's a dust cloud coming through Aralsk in current day Uzbekistan, a city which no longer exists because of the decline of that lake. This is Tashkent in Uzbekistan, 300 miles from the Aral Sea. This picture was taken 10 days after a dust storm came off of the lake. Right, still dealing with this level of dust pollution. For the people around the Aral Sea, 500,000 people were permanently relocated. They just abandoned the region. We don't have very good numbers on that because it was during the Soviet era. But for those who stayed behind, we can compare their health and economic outcomes with those who aren't in the area. And again, the rates of cancer, rates of infant mortality have gone way up. 3/4 of the population is living below the poverty line, and the subsistence farmers who are still there now have to pre-irrigate to remove some of the salts from their soil before they can grow their crops. So again, our soil fertility, our health, our economy all depend on the lake. If these examples seem too far away, here's some from California, Owens Lake, the largest source of particulate matter pollution in the country. It actually just got surpassed by Mono Lake, I heard. Not a great story there. The Salton Sea, and then Mar Chiquita. Great Salt Lake is no longer the largest saline lake in the hemisphere. Mar Chiquita in Argentina is, but it is also in the decline. And this is a 300-mile-long dust cloud being deposited on agricultural fields. The difference is, there is no other lake, no other saline lake in the world with such a concentration of people around it. Right? So if we look at the area that's being hit by these dust storms, it's between 3 and 5 million people. And that has never happened before. So the stakes are higher here than they've been for any other lake. Likewise, if you look at just the value, the economic value of our infrastructure, it's likely over $1 trillion in the area immediately downwind of the lake. Polling from Utah State suggests that somewhere around 17% of Utahns are asking the question, can I stay here? I get phone calls all the time from people out of state saying, hey, can I send my kids to the University of Utah? Is it safe? And I tell them as a BYU professor, no, you need to send them to BYU. But it's already impacting perception. It's already impacting quality of life, right? So the investment that we need now is a very small investment compared to the risk that we abate and the positive value that we can get. Because ultimately, for me, the number one reason why I care about the lake is I think this shows who we are. Are we the kind of people that say, oh, you know what? It's going to require a big change. Let's just see if it gets better on its own. Or are we the kind of pioneers that say, this has never been done anywhere in the world, and we're going to be the first community to do it? And I really believe, when I look at the diversity of people engaging on this issue, from the far left to the far right and a bunch of moderates, I really believe that we can do it. Because none of these other communities have had the resources that we have. The knowledge of what's happening, the financial resources to fix this, and then the community spirit to do it together. Here's where we are today. So we are approaching where we were in 2021, the year before the all-time low. And all of our efforts so far have increased water flows by about 2% of what we need to restore the lake. So that's a start. And it always takes more time and effort to get that first part. Anybody here started a business? Right? You work a long time before you see any progress, and then things can really take off. So I think this is both sobering and encouraging. We have made progress. The lake, for the first time, has permanent water rights, right, for the lake itself. And the question that keeps me up is how are we going to change the ending? The world is watching, right? Particularly with the Olympics coming. Almost every week, there's another headline about what's going on with Great Salt Lake. But whatever your religious beliefs are, I invite you to reflect on the scripture. And it really, for me, is kind of, it's the recipe. Are we going to do this out of fear? No. We need to do this with a sound mind, right? We need good information. Where is the water going? How much water are we likely to have in the future? And then we need to amass the power to actually change the system. Right, so this is the combination of faith, that vision of being able to imagine a better world, and the work that the mayor talked about, where the hope comes in, where the progress comes in, where we can actually do this. So how much water do we need to reverse the decline of the lake? Well, the more water we can save and deliver, the faster the lake comes up and the safer the recovery. The state strike team has put together really good numbers. I've translated them here. This is the increase in water flow to the lake per year in acre feet. This is how that translates to a reduction in consumptive water use. And then this is the chances of ever reaching a healthy level with that level of water conservation. So if we say, all right, we think 10% attainable, we need to realize that only gives us 8% chance of ever restoring the lake. If the weather changes, right, some of the lines do go up. We got less, but it's less than a 1 in 10 chance. If we want to have a better than 2/3 chance of reaching the healthy lake level, we need to reduce water consumption by about 45%. That's watershed wide. And those are eye-opening numbers, but they also are attainable numbers, right? We've seen cities attain that level of conservation in very short order. And again, it's good that the system right now is not very efficient, because the room for improvement is immense. But it's more, so the fabulous work of the Basin Integrated Plan and all of the research going into that also has some sobering messages, right? Agricultural optimization, if it works, that's likely only going to save us around 12% for those farms that switch, for example, from flood to pivot. And so that's leaving us in this realm here. We've got to be thinking about crop switching, changes to acreage. And again, this is not a punitive measure being levied on farmers. This is us coming together and saying, do we want to continue farming in this region? Because the other scenario is collapse of both urban and rural areas. So we've been working on this with two organizations. First, Grow the Flow, the co-sponsor of tonight's event. And you may not know all of the people here on our board of directors, but what I want to point to you is, if you do know who they are, Whatever your political background, you're going to be triggered by at least one of them. Because we have on this board everybody from the far left to the far right, working together, not based out of fear, but out of solidarity, saying, how do we bring in our political leaders, right? How do we support them for the work that they're doing? How do we activate new constituents? Working with Grow the Flow, we were able to bring together this coalition that Representative Koford mentioned, Great Salt Lake Rising. It's a business coalition, as well as a philanthropic and religious coalition. So if any of you are rich or have rich aunts or uncles, please invite them. We can plug them in here. Our goal is to raise $100 million over the next 6 months, and then use that to catalyze all of the solutions that are being implemented right now. And it has been amazing to see, again, how every family we've spoken with has stepped up and said, well, of course, we'll help. And we can be cynical and say, oh yeah, the legislature's all developers. Or we could say, the developers have as much to lose as the farmers do, right? When we're thinking about real estate, when we're thinking about insurance. Already in Chicago, there are discussions about, is it sound to fund, to insure some of these developments in Utah with Great Salt Lake where it is. So we're in this together. Just a few weeks after Great Salt Lake Rising came together, they were able to work with the governor, with the legislature, and we had a commitment to restore the lake by 2034. And this is absolutely extraordinary, right? Prior to that, the goal was, okay, within 30 years, it'd be good for the lake to come back up. But now we have a level-based, so the commitment by the state is that it'll be at or above a healthy level by 2034. And this is what the arrow, or what the line needs to do to get there, right? It's about 8 feet in 8 years. And to get there, we're going to need emergency measures that start this winter and this spring, as far as changes to how we manage water. But we're not going to do those emergency measures forever. We're also going to need long-term shifts in how we distribute and share water. And the goal is to go from this kind of vast cloud of different groups, not all working together, to really be coordinating support, accelerating conservation, and then, I think most importantly, building trust. Because what we need more than water is trust in one another. We're stuck in this negative cycle of blame. And it's starting to break, and it's starting to build into something that's really exciting. And I just want to end with this painting. Does anybody know who made this painting, or what it shows? Yeah, it's Minerva Teicher, a pioneer artist. And what is this showing? The miracle of the gulls, right? First of all, is anybody embarrassed that our state bird is the California seagull? Our state tree used to be the Colorado blue spruce, but they changed it. Now it's the aspen. So where are the seagulls coming from? They're coming from Great Salt Lake, right? The largest breeding colony of California seagulls is on Great Salt Lake, and it's in trouble. And so those seagulls saved many of our ancestors when they arrived in this area and didn't know how to grow crops. They didn't know if they were going to make it from one year to the next. And now it's our chance to say, are we the kind of people who now will turn back and say, we're going to save this lake? Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, I'm Kerry Kelly from the University of Utah, and one thing that really struck me about Ben's talk is the parallels to this and dealing with particle pollution during our wintertime inversions. So I got the chance to serve on the Air Quality Board for 8 years and the Air Quality Policy Board for another 4 years, and we found something pretty interesting in terms of working together. So if we look at trends in particulate matter during over the last 20 years, what we see is our pies keep getting smaller. So when our pies keep getting smaller, that tells us that our particulate matter concentrations are going down, which is awesome. And those different colors sort of tell you where they come from. We've made big strides in reducing mobile source emissions. Most of that's due to federal regulations. Same for nitrate and sulfate. We made some improvements in chlorine, and there's some research that's given us some insight into some of the sources of chlorine, including US magnesium, that's helped us to address that. We've also dealt with fires, not dealt with it, but we've reduced contributions from residential wood burning, so that's been great. And but one thing that has happened is dust is increasing. So even over the last 25 years, we've started to see dust increasing. So that is a challenge we face. But I think one nice parallel is this is our problem. So dust from the Great Salt Lake is our problem. It doesn't come from California. Same thing with pollution during our wintertime inversions. We have a constrained airshed. So the pollution that we're dealing with is coming from us. But that means we also have an opportunity to address it. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the health impacts. The dust from the Great Salt Lake has not been all that well studied. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's known. So there are some associations, but there haven't been a ton of health studies on dust or PM10, and there's some reasons for that I'll go into. But some things are pretty well understood. So hospital admissions for respiratory conditions go up with dust events or just increasing levels of PM10 or dust. So low birth weights go up, as do premature births. We also have increases in coronary heart disease, and then increased mortality, and that is some studies. Studies have not yet shown this in the United States, but dust is under studies, and there are a couple reasons for that. A lot of our dust events don't last that long. In addition, we don't measure dust that much. If you look around the Great Salt Lake, we measure a lot of PM 2.5. That's particles smaller than 2.5 diameters, in 2.5 microns in diameter, but we don't measure PM10 or dust as much because that has historically not been as big of a problem for us. In addition, a lot of times people will only report 24-hour measurements, and that obscures some of these big dust events that have a short spike that lasts for 1 or 2 hours. That also makes the health effects very difficult to study. So one way to understand the health impacts of dust from the Great Salt Lake is you can start by just looking at the composition. We know we have elevated levels of lead, copper, arsenic, and we know there are adverse health effects associated with each of those. We can also look at something called oxidative potential. That's a relatively inexpensive study that you can do to give you an idea of how kind of irritating the particle is going to be to you. You can also do studies on cells and animals, and as you go around this chart, these studies get bigger and more expensive. So people might ask, why have we not done a study on the Great Salt Lake? Well, it is complicated. You need large populations, which we have, but you need dust. You need good measurements of dust and exposure, which we don't have, and you need a long time frame. So people are starting to look at studying this, and I anticipate there will be studies soon. But I'll tell you a little bit about some work we've done. So we did do a relatively inexpensive study looking at what's the oxidative potential or potential to induce an inflammatory response of dust from the Great Salt Lake. So we took samples, we separated them into a size that you can breathe, or PM10. And what happens is when you have a lot of oxidative potential, you generate reactive oxygen species. That causes an inflammatory response. So we have all kinds of stressors in our lives, and normally our immune system can balance that pretty well, but we dust and other antagonists can actually overwhelm our systems. So we get imbalanced, and then we can get this whole inflammatory cascade. So you can get things like asthma exacerbations. We can get exacerbations of COPD. So all these things are known to be associated with oxidative potential. There's also some limited evidence for arrhythmia, cardiac events, and heart failure. So in our study, we looked at samples from different areas of the Great Salt Lake. We separated them into a size that you can actually breathe. Then what we found was this, which was pretty surprising even to the other people in the study. We found that dust from the Great Salt Lake had higher oxidative potential, probably more irritating than other regional playas. These included the West Desert, the Tooele dry lake bed, the severe dry lake bed, and one others. For some reason, I've just forgotten it, sorry. But anyways, we were actually quite surprised. And that gray bar is Arizona test dust. That is something that's known to be quite irritating to our lungs. It's got high levels of silica. And in some cases, we actually had statistically significantly higher levels of oxidative potential, likely to induce inflammatory response. And that's likely associated with some of the composition of the dust that we are getting from our Great Salt Lake. So the dust from the Great Salt Lake, again, has high levels of arsenic, lead, copper, manganese. These things can be irritating to us and our lungs, and then can initiate this inflammatory cascade. So there's some reason to think that maybe dust from the Great Salt Lake could be a little bit more challenging from a health perspective, but more studies definitely needed. There's also some recent studies by the Riley Group at the University of Utah looking at mice and cellular studies, sort of supporting this. Hey, it looks like dust from the Great Salt Lake is responsible for inducing this inflammatory cascade. And then understanding dust exposure. So one challenge with dust is that it settles pretty quickly, so you can have pretty different dust exposure depending upon where you live in the Salt Lake Valley. So if you do something like, a lot of people use purple air monitors, which are great for wildfire smoke or wintertime inversions. One challenge is if you look at it during a dust event, here's a picture of a dust event. You pull it up, or you pull up KSL map, looks like air quality is awesome. Air quality is not awesome. Those sensors just don't do a great job at measuring dust. And people are working on lower cost sensors, and I'll show some results. So we are looking at lower cost sensors to complement regulatory measurements because they're so expensive to let's see if this will work. Oh yeah, okay, this is a dust event from this past year, and you can start to see the low-cost sensors are starting to flag these dust events. This dust event comes from the south, so that makes me think that for the Provo and Salt Lake areas, we're not getting dust from the Great Salt Lake. We're probably getting dust from the severe dry lake bed down to the south. But if you live up here, you're likely getting dust from the Great Salt Lake, so that's more important for you. And as you try to understand exposure, it's important that we have regulatory monitors as well as hopefully lower cost measurements that can help us understand the exposure to dust. And with that, mostly I just wanted to thank all the teams that helped me get this data from my university. And then if you're interested, we're working on some better strategies to include low-cost sensors plus regulatory measurements. There are also some sensors coming out in Davis County. They've been working with those to try to get more measurements. The state has been working with folks like Kevin Perry, who I think has spoken to this group, to cite some of the regulatory monitors in places up here in this area and even further north, because those areas are going to be potentially more affected by dust from the Great Salt Lake, because a lot of times we get dust events with strong winds from the south. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I think Ben's going to come up and we'll both take questions, right? Okay. We'll keep our distance so we don't get interfered.
I think they'll work okay. But we'll keep our distance since we're from different universities.
Exactly.
It's just more comfortable.
Hi, Ben. I have a question on your 5 years.
Yeah.
How many years ago was that?
Yeah, so that was 2023, when we got basically 2 years of snowfall in 1 year in 2023 with the record snowpack. That pushed back that timeline by a couple of years. But it was interesting as we talked with the biologists and hydrologists and others that contributed to that study. The consensus was, in 2022, when we did that analysis, the food web was within 1 year of collapse, right? And then we simply looked out and said, if we continue losing water at that rate, when is most of the lake basically gone? That was 5 to 7 years. And so we picked that number in the middle, basically saying it's now or never, right? And I think that's the message. We're right on the edge, and until we bring the lake back, we're going to be just a year or two of drought conditions from going over that edge.
Hi, I've got a question. So PM10, I've always heard of it as being dust, but in your presentation you talked about PM 2.5 as well. Does the dust does it come as PM 2.5 or?
Actually, that's a great question. So PM 2.5 is a subset of PM10. So when we get a dust event, PM 2.5 will increase as well. And I did show the map that includes purple air sensors. The problem with those and why they don't show anything during a dust event is they actually really measure PM1. So if that helps you at all.
Okay, so we're looking at the smaller particles, not the dust.
Exactly.
Particles that are large.
Yeah, although there is still a little bit of, even if you've got a dust event, there is some small fraction that is small.
Thank you.
While the microphone moves, Maya asked me to put up growtheflowutah.org. So if you want to plug in and be kept aware of how things are developing, if you just Google Grow the Flow or go to growtheflowutah.org, you can sign up.
Hi, this is a question for Ben, and actually the previous Ben, and he's still here as well. So you had a slide that shows $2.5 billion of economic activity from the lake,
Yeah.
but you didn't show agricultural sector and farming, and specifically fodder, which is alfalfa grass,
Yeah.
which I think are the main consumptive use.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of different numbers out there. There was a good analysis done for agricultural activity in the whole Bear River watershed. And those, depending on how you slice those numbers, the Richter study that was mentioned before estimated that the value of the fodder is maybe in the $100 to $400 million range a year.
Right.
So again, not insignificant, but certainly, if we view it in a trade-off perspective, then not as big as some of these other impacts.
Well, there was a number that came up in the previous discussion talking about the export of alfalfa being roughly a quarter, and it was sort of minimized, like that's not a lot.
Yeah.
That's equivalent of 600,000 acre feet
Right.
in our state. I don't know what percentage of that's Bear River. I would probably say more than half.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like, given the infrastructure that's at risk here, the cheapest possible solution is to work with those farmers and find a way to remove that the irrigation on that third cut, which is where most of the water goes. The first two are pretty much what you get from the spring, and then help them be economically successful without irrigating, so that they maintain that part of the economy and the production, or most of it, and then that export piece. We essentially subsidize it to go away. Is that a realistic scenario?
It is and it isn't. Part of why we grow so much feed is because the Farm Bill heavily subsidizes animal agriculture, right? So it's actually a choice at the national level that's encouraging farmers here to shift to that crop. And if you look through time, the acreage, I should first say, overall water consumption is flat, and it has been since about the 1980s. Right, so in that time, the population has much more than doubled. The economy has much more than tripled. Right, so we've shown that we can flourish. The population can grow without increasing water demand. But what has shifted through time, if we look over the last 100 years or so, alfalfa and hay make up a larger portion of what we grow, and that's largely this national and international demand for that crop. And so there are ways to, for example, have that third cutting be eliminated. Right now, it is so slow. So there's so much red tape that if there's a farmer that wants to lease or sell water to the state, this is the real number. It takes on average 1,000 lawyer hours to get that through. And so what that means is you can only do it with huge chunks of water. And the policy development team collaborating with the state legislature is working on dramatically streamlining that process. Right? Wyoming actually has a pretty effective water market, and there, this is a simplification, but not much. Somebody puts up a virtual Post-it note that says, hey, I've got 2,000 acre feet of water I'm not going to use. Does anybody want it? Right, and it can be transferred seamlessly, frictionlessly. That's what we need here. But right now, if a farmer has to, 8 months in advance, hire a lawyer so that they can get the third cutting, it's just not we're not going to save the lake that way. So these are the kinds of scaling. We've learned lessons. We've gotten a little bit down the road. Now we've got to figure out how to really accelerate. One last point on alfalfa. For the dairy and meat industry in the watershed, we already import about 2/3 of the feed being fed to those livestock. So again, we're not talking about local food security. We're talking about a national and international commodity crop. And likewise, for cities, we're not talking about drinking water. We're talking about, are we going to have to irrigate less outdoors? Right? Do we have to have a different outdoor landscaping? So we need to put in contrast what the potential trade-offs are.
You, sir. Yes.
The Olympics coming in 2034. There was a couple of articles in the media this last spring about the IOC and the SLOC wanting to see sustainability in general as part of the infrastructure development and hosting of the games. And they named a Colorado company called the Brendel Group as their consulting partner. I've been trying to get a foot in the door. They've got my resume. They know how to contact me. Have they contacted? Has there been any energy or financing or anything coming up at your level from the Brendel Group, from the IOC, to try to push some of this stuff along?
Yeah, so I haven't interacted with the Brendel Group, but the Olympic Committee is very, very concerned about this issue, right? In fact, it's been communicated to us at Great Salt Lake Rising. It's their #1 concern. Right? So in addition to being bad for our health, when that dust is deposited on the snow, that causes the snow to darken and melt out early. Mackenzie Skiles at the University of Utah estimated that in 2022, snowmelt happened about 22 days early because of that. Right? So this has a direct impact. It's a huge risk to the games, to the state's reputation, right? When the world comes, we're Dust Lake City. Right, so no, I think that there actually has been a really good synergy there. It's given us a timeline, and the former Speaker of the House, Brad Wilson, said it best. We're not saving the lake for the Olympics, right? They're much more important things than a sporting event, even as important as the Olympics is, right? We're saving the lake for ourselves, for our future. The Olympics is just a healthy deadline, right? That's the target.
Yeah, I have a question. I am curious. It seems like you're in spaces that are not always filled with a lot of scientists, and I'm wondering how you communicate the real issue to politicians, like considering the ones tonight who seem to intentionally spread misinformation about this issue. It's pretty well established by research that 80% of the consumptive use of water that should be going into the Great Salt Lake is actually going to agriculture. And I think listening to who we heard earlier, we would think that it was mostly our individual outdoor use. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do you combat misinformation in political circles or other spaces that you are maybe not, you might be the only scientist, basically?
Nine?
Do you want to take that, Kerry?
Yeah. So we faced a really similar problem with our wintertime inversions. And what happened is people were like, nah, it's the refineries. No, it's not. It's the automobiles. No, it's not. It's this. Because it's way easier for everybody to point at someone else because they don't want to make any changes. You do have to get everybody in a room and you have to sit down and you have to realize like, hey, we got to make some changes. Because one of the problems you get is if you keep saying it's somebody else, but it doesn't get any better, then you end up in a worse and worse situation. So we, even with the air quality and wintertime inversions, we had some very unlikely bedfellows, and those included folks like Heal Utah and Governor Gary Herbert. We're like, we need to bring Tier 3 fuel to Utah, and we got the refineries in on it too. They determined that even though they were going to have to make some investments, it was going to be a very cost-effective way for us to reduce particle pollution during the winter. So I think you really have to get a lot of people, the people who are making the decisions in the room, and the scientists have to stay engaged and keep saying, here is what the science tells us. But you do have to be very patient, and it takes some, I guess, diplomatic speaking so that you're not just pissing people off and like having everyone send angry emails, because that sometimes backfires.
Yeah, the thing that I'd add, I completely agree. In the 2 Timothy scripture, do you remember the 3 factors? Anybody remember? So God has not given us a spirit of fear. That you didn't know this was going to be a Sunday school lesson, but this is what happens when you invite a BYU professor to talk, you guys. God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of a sound mind. So I look at science as the sound mind part of that, right? Like it gives us information about what's going on. But we also need power, right? So I'm thinking about Utah Lake. Does anybody remember that proposal to build the world's largest artificial islands on Utah Lake? Right? And so it was not a scientifically based proposal, right? They didn't have any PhD scientists on their whole team. But they had power. Right? They'd work behind the scenes to amass power. And it wasn't until the scientific community and the public, we could think of that as either power or love, came together and said, hey, you guys, we don't want the state's largest city in the middle of our lake, which is in the process of recovering, right? We want to keep on restoring the lake. And it was interesting to see, instead of having intellectual debates with our legislators and leaders, once they saw where the people were, they switched. And they were very interested in the science at that point, right? So our form of government, the power is with the people. And it's easy to get cynical and say, oh no, our legislators are going to do whatever they want when they do something that we disagree with. But does anybody know who Tim Hawks is? So Tim Hawks has been one of the most effective legislators on Great Salt Lake. In 2022, and that session in 2023, when the lake was right on the edge, the lake was in the news all the time, Tim Hawks got a total of 2 emails about the lake. Can you believe that? Like, there's a sense that everybody knows that you all care about this, but that is not the case. Our leaders only know about it if we are consistently, respectfully, and insistently communicating it to them. So I think the way that we get our leaders to integrate more knowledge, that sound mind piece, is if we use love and power to turn them in that direction. And again, I think that we've seen that in a big way over the last few months with Great Salt Lake.
And can I add one more thing? So what we found when people were interested in advocating for better air quality is that people have very short attention spans. So during a series of poor air quality events during winter, people are calling their legislator, what are you gonna do? This is ridiculous. And then what happens is the inversions kind of settle out towards the end of February, the beginning of March, and people stop calling their legislators. And then, well, you know, some of the really good ideas just never make it over the finish line because the enthusiasm sort of waned. And the same thing with the Great Salt Lake. So this is something that you have to stay on and let legislators know that you really care and you want change, and you just have to keep on respectfully telling them what you want, and don't stop towards the end of the session, because that's what helps push things over.
Amen.
Quick question. So I know we talked about 2022, the Great Salt Lake was at its lowest, but then also you talked about 2023 was the biggest water year, one of the biggest. At the same time, you said that the lake is creating that snowpack. How does that kind of make sense? And 2022 was the lowest, but then 23 was one of the bumper years.
Yeah, really good question. So in an average year, the lake is contributing between 5 and 15% of the snowpack. But then you also have these much larger weather patterns that are going to determine whether it's a drought year or a wet year. So in that case, we had these atmospheric rivers that broke through and came over from the Pacific Ocean. So it's interesting to look. There's a researcher at USU, Michael LaPlante, who's pointed out we really didn't expect that based on where the Pacific oscillation was for that year. And I always tell them, well, that's the prayer effect. Again, my personal belief is that was divine intervention and help. But then we've got to figure out how to balance the budget and what we do. Because just like with financial security, you can't ensure that we're going to stay in the black with these windfall profits, right? So we're going to have wet years, we're going to have dry years. That was the best wet year we've ever seen. But even so, that only pushed that collapse timeline back by a couple of years, right? It gave us a shot on goal, which is important, because in 2022, there wasn't any amount of money that could have filled the lake, right? Our reservoirs were empty, our groundwater was low, our soil moisture was low. Now we're in a situation where we actually have money in the bank, right? In our reservoirs, and if we conserve, then we get that water to the lake. But it's a great question.
I was just wondering, has there been any studies on isotopic or chemical fingerprinting of the dust to confirm which portions originate from the lake bed versus other regional sources like agricultural or industrial?
Yes, and in fact, I did want to mention that sometimes when we get dust events here, sometimes they're from the Great Salt Lake, sometimes they're from other places, and you can look at chemical composition and isotopes to help you figure out where it came from. So sometimes we'll get dust sort of just depending upon wind direction from the severe dry lake bed, from the Tule dry lake bed, the West Desert. So it just sort of depends on where the wind is coming from. And all those used to be inland lakes like ours. So we definitely, and there's a reason people don't live out next to those anymore because they're not very pleasant. So there's a reason that we live here and we need to keep the lake.
Yeah, if you're interested specifically, there's a critical zone network project that just finished up that was on.
Still going.
It is? Okay, yeah, still going. Ours finished up. But yeah, Greg Carling is a part of that, and it's an amazing team. But the picture that I shared, I was careful. That was an event where we had wind coming from the north, and Kevin Perry confirmed that storm did come off of Great Salt Lake.
We have one last question just right over here.
Hi. Over here. So I have a question about how we guarantee that the water we're saving is getting to the Great Salt Lake. My individual contribution, both as a city member who's trying to save in outdoor water use and also as a family that does alfalfa farming. If we have a certain number of water shares and we're trying to reduce the amount of water that we're using or changing over land use, how do we know that that water is not going to be used for something else, kind of due to water law, prior appropriation laws, use it or lose it type of laws that are currently still in place? How can we be sure that our efforts to get water to the lake are actually getting there?
Yeah. This has been a major challenge, and it's interesting. We brought in a group of farmers and the Department of Ag and the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office into a discussion session, and to a person, the farmers wanted to conserve water. They wanted to help with this issue. Their concern was exactly that. Like, hey, we're worried if we conserve that it's actually maybe going to be even worse, right? Because then we're not going to have the ag-return flows. It'll be taken up by a city or something else. So it's sometimes called the delivery problem or the shepherding problem, and it's key. There are so many solutions to this problem. And right now, this policy team that's working together in conjunction, private sector, universities, and the state have come up with a dozen different ways to get water to the lake. My favorite new one is you can bank that water, hold it in the reservoir, and then release it during the non-irrigating season. And in the wintertime, then it gets to the lake right when the Bear River is flowing. That's just one of a million examples. And the state engineer, Teresa Wilhelmsen, I think made this the clearest. She said, save the water, and I promise you we will figure out a way to get it to the lake. So we can't be waiting for, we're taking off in the airplane, we're building the airplane as we're going down the runway, right? So we can't be waiting and saying, okay, I'm not gonna do my part because I don't know right now if it's gonna make it to the lake, because we actually only solve that part of the problem when we get there, when we have conserved a substantial amount of water. But the solutions are in process, and there'll be a report coming out this month outlining some more of those details.
I think that's all the time that we have for questions for the rest of the night. Let's just give one more round of applause for Dr. Koford.
Thank you so much.